Take two. Take two.
Oh, man.
I guarantee
Does that even count as a take? I had to hit the record button. So we're asking the question, what is the best song ever that mentions God? And so many folks in my community recommended this song. So everybody turn it up. 24 Frames by Jason Isbell.
This is how you make yourself vanish into nothing. This is how you make yourself worthy of the love that she gave to you back when you didn't own a beautiful thing. And this is how you make yourself call your mother. This is how you make yourself closer to your brother. Remember him back when he was small enough to help you sing. You thought God was an architect. Now you know he's something like a pipe bomb ready to blow. And everything you build that's all for show goes up in flame in 24 frames.
What does that chorus mean to you?
It's tough, man. I think you talk about somebody looking from that experience. You can think about it either from his experience or just from like the concept of a fictional character. But when you start thinking about God as less of a creative force and more of a destructive force, some people just feel like God has got them in his crosshairs sometimes. And I think that's a real relatable feeling when we find ourselves getting pretty low or on the bottom end of things.
You know, growing up in a Christian home, I was always taught that everything happens for a reason. Everything is under God's plan. Like, it's not happening if God didn't allow it to happen. Just to kind of turn that thought on its head, instead of being an architect, it's like a pipe bomb ready to blow. It goes against everything I've ever been taught. I've never heard God talked about like that.
I think that it's especially in country music, that's a ballsy line. That's that's a thing.
Being from Alabama, that's a ballsy line.
Right. And it's unpopular to question in the way that he is questioning. That's the real truth about it. I think a lot of us would like to question, but it is unpopular and it is frowned upon. And I think if we're talking about God, we're talking about unprovable things, we're talking about matters of faith, I think it is important for us to accept our uncertainty and therefore requiring faith instead of acting as if we know something as a certainty and therefore ridiculing people for having questions or being in a painful place and seeing God as a pipe bomb instead of an architect.
And this is how you see yourself floating on the ceiling. This is how you help her when her heart stops beating. What happened to the body you noticed every change and when? And this is how you talk to her when no one else is listening. This is how you help her when the muse goes missing. You vanish so she can go drowning in a dream again.
That's a hell of a lyric.
You thought God was an architect. Now you know he's something like a pipe bomb ready to blow. And everything you build, it's all for show, goes up in flame in 24 frames.
Those BGVs are jacked.
Sadler's a god at playing this live.
You thought God was an architect. Now you know
BGV's are jacked.
black car ready to go. You made some new friends after the show, but you forget their name in 24 frames.
So So let's talk about this title for a second, 24 frames. If you guys are familiar with how film works, cameras usually shoot at 24 frames per second, which mimics the way that the human eye sees motion. So it's the most natural looking tracking of our motions. The metaphor here is that he is watching his life like a movie, that his life is being laid out in front of him like a movie. It's the idea of this is what your life is, and you're watching it like a movie. And I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about when we watched Childers cover Pink Floyd. It's that, you know, no one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. Like, this is your life now, and these things that are happening are your movie. So many times we're waiting for something else to happen, and I feel like 24 frames is a great metaphor for that.
What do you think all of those, if this, if that? Because I couldn't tell if it was asking some kind of advice. It was kind of a strange way to say the things that I think he was trying to say.
Yeah, and that's kind of the artistry of it, right? Is that he weaves it around in a different direction.
It's unique.
Than we would normally think to talk about him. I always feel like a lot of times Isbell's talking to himself in his songs.
Okay.
When he seems to be talking to somebody else. I've always felt like this song is like that. And I feel like that's why the metaphor of 24 frames, the metaphor of the film, the movie, the cinematic feel of it. I got a couple things that I love about this song and this album that I want to talk about production-wise.
Come on.
First off, this is from the album, like, isn't this something closer to free, right?
Yep.
Something more than free. 2015, this comes out, you know, we're talking about the old Drive-By Truckers guy. This is a follow-up to some pretty successful stuff. And he says that he wants this album, you can really hear it, especially like in the way he does the intro to this. He wants this album to sound like indie music sounded when he was a kid, when he was 15. So these guys, of course, Drive-Bys from Athens, right? Same city as REM. They specifically wanted something more than free to sound like an REM record. So if you set this timescape, you think about when REM releases Murmur, April 1983. These are the big albums of the time. Motley Crue's Too Fast for Love, 1981. 1982, Thriller. In 1979, Christopher Cross had released his self-titled debut album, which was the institution of the West Coast sound, now known as yacht rock. We're talking about Quincy Jones. We're talking about Crew. We're talking about overproduced music. We are talking about music at the peak of production. And from this, these art school kids from Athens create this band called REM that is everything stripped down and raw. It's just the songwriting and the sound of their instruments and the melodies. That's all they're doing. And in this time that Isbell wants to make this new record with this song that gets back to the roots, we're talking 2015. That year, 2014, Something More Than Free comes out in 2015. In 2014, Beck's Morning Phase and The War on Drugs, Lost in the Dream, two of the reverbiest, most produced albums I've ever heard in my life, come out. And those are the big rock albums of 2014, not to mention St. Vincent, FKA Twigs, Aphex Twins. Those were albums that topped the chart in 2014. So like REM in the 80s, like Nirvana after the hair craze in the 90s, these guys are stripping it down to bare bones and going back to this really raw sound for this album. Everybody needs to take another listen to Something More Than Free. I listened to it again today. A fantastic album. Listen to that thing stripped down. This one's for the nerds. Listen to them rejecting that overproduced stuff. Also, Morning Phase and Lost in the Dream are two of my favorite albums. But I love this raw, really organic, indie sounding Americana music, for sure.